Hey, have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that let you record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer, just like I'm doing now. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so you can hear it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And it's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome to Journey to Esquire, the podcast. I'm Jocelyn Hardrick, founder and president of Diversity Access Pipeline, Inc., the company behind this podcast and other great programs. Journey to Esquire Scholarship and Leadership Program provides $2,000 cash scholarships to third-year law students and internships to second-year law students, along with leadership, training, and mentors. Journey to Esquire, the blog, provides insightful articles to help navigate you through law school and beyond. Find out more on our website, www.journeytoesquire.com. So welcome, Season 2, Journey to Esquire, the podcast. I'm Jocelyn Hardrick, the founder and president of Diversity Access Pipeline, Inc., the nonprofit corporation that runs Journey to Esquire, the podcast, and our other great programs, Journey to Esquire, the Scholarship and Leadership Program, and Journey to Esquire, the blog. So visit www.journeytoesquire.com to find out more. I'm so excited today. We have Dr. Peter Christian Aigner, who is an historian of 20th century America. His first book explores the life and career of Daniel Patrick Moynihan as a view into the strains of American liberalism between the New Deal and the present century. He's also has published a lot of essays in The Nation, The Atlantic, and The New Republic. And you can check him out at the Gotham Center of New York City History. And he's here today because he helped to contribute to Journey to Esquire, the Oral History Project. So we shared snippets of that project in Season 1. But before I started that program, I had to kind of figure out what I was going to do. So we're going to talk about that a little later, how Dr. Aigner got involved. So welcome, Dr. Aigner. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm still trying to get past the weirdness of Dr. Aigner.
Yeah, I know. I felt that way when I became a lawyer. Everyone's like, counselor, and you turn around like, who are they talking to? I'm like, oh, that's me. I'm the lawyer. So
I forget regularly.
I know, and then I'm a friend of yours, so it does feel weird to say Dr. Aigner, but I love calling my friends Doctor and Esquire because I'm so proud of them, and I'm looking forward to like the students in the program. I'm like, I can't wait to call you counselor. So tell us a little bit about what you do with the Gotham Center and what the Gotham Center is.
Sure. So I'm the director at the Gotham Center for New York City History, which is the only academic institution that's devoted to New York City history in the country. We're 20 years old now. It was founded shortly after Mike Wallace, our founder and first director, published with Edwin Burroughs the classic Gotham History of New York to 1898, when the five boroughs became New York City. That was the first in what is now a trilogy that he's been working on. But the institution was created at a time when there was a real need in the city to have some sort of organization that would network and support all the historians and folks working in public history, trying to raise awareness about New York City's really unparalleled contributions to the development of the country. So the Gotham Center is maybe the one place where we don't shy away from saying New York City, is not the center of the world, but, is from just an objectively historical perspective. We often say that New York City is the best lens on which to look at American development. We have live events, and we do K-12 programming as well. We are working on online classes right now. We're were set to do walking tours this summer until events overtook us. And then we have blogs and podcasts and the like, and we're working on our first tourism app, and then we have a bunch of research programs as well. So workshops, seminars, research grants, writing fellowships, etc.
Great. Well, two things we're learning. You're really busy. And you're based in...
You knew that, yes.
You're based in New York City. So you and I went to college together at Fordham University. That's where we met. Both New Yorkers, but I ventured off into Florida. And so now I'm in the Tampa Bay area where Diversity Access Pipeline, Inc. is based. And so talk to us about how, a New York City historian becomes interested in an oral history project about lawyers in Tampa Bay. So I became interested because, I majored in African American studies and you majored in history in college. I've never lost my love of history, and particularly African American history. And so after I became a lawyer, I started to interact with all of these lawyers who were still practicing, not just still alive, but still practicing, who were the first woman Black lawyer in Hillsborough County, Pasco County, and other parts of Florida. She's actually now the longest practicing Black woman in Florida, over 50 years. And, the first Black man who was hired in the PD's office, who was allowed to join the Democratic Party in any kind of the local, leadership and establishment.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of like, wait, I hear these stories and I feel like we need to capture them because they're not really captured in a way that I felt like they should be. There are, snippets here and there. They have all these events where they speak, no one's recording. And I'm kind of like, hey, we got to capture these things. So I come to you, I'm like, who do I know is a historian? And you pop into my head. So I reach out to you. I tell you about this project. And what do you tell me?
Well, and there's a really interesting legal history in Florida in this period dealing with civil rights that involves, big figures like Thurgood Marshall and the like, which is not my area, obviously, but the Gotham Center has at times considered doing various oral history projects, and our conversation got me thinking really about the New York scene. There was, until recently, this impression that the civil rights movement begins with Rosa Parks and ends with the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act. And that was the sweep of things. It was a Southern story, and it was about a particular set of de jure Jim Crow laws that are overturned. But historians have long rejected that by now, like for a generation have rejected that argument and that whole sort of way of thinking about the period, and really sort of expanded our understanding of what we would define sort of discreetly as a ETE, not EET, as a, the civil rights movement era in American history, which really starts at, with like the late 30s, and the dramatic changes that take place within organizations like the NAACP and the Urban League, and runs, depending on your perspective. Historians have many opinions, and we differ with each other constantly. Running through the early 70s or later. So I thought about whether we might do the same, which then got me realizing that the major sort of collections we have of oral history tend to sort of privilege, which is sort of true across the board, tends to sort of privilege like the elites, even these very grassroots organizations. And so I think the work that you're doing is really, really important. And I think that we, as these people are retiring or leaving us, it's more important than ever to try to capture those stories. And these people are living history. and their stories are really important, and they've been forgotten or neglected for too long. So so I got involved because I just wanted to help out with a good project. And there's yeah.
We learned something about New York City. I know a lot, and I haven't lived there. I did get that sense that people thought all the discrimination and the civil rights movement occurred in the South, but my lived experience told me otherwise. And the NAACP obviously had headquarters in New York City. Thurgood Marshall went all over the South. And all three lawyers that we interviewed both said Thurgood Marshall inspired them to become an attorney, which was so important to me because they saw someone who not only looked like them practicing law, but who was working on their behalf and on the behalf of the Black community. And so now, as students and law students and new attorneys look at their journey to Esquire and say, what do I really want to do with my life? They need role models to look towards. And so these role models, we've captured some of their stories. Some of them have more they want to say. So, but if you want to find out more about the Journey to Esquire Oral History Project, you can go to the website, or you can go to season 1 and listen to the interviews and let us know what you think. So Dr. Aigner has brought up a lot of things. New York City being at the center of the United States and being this lens through which we can see how lots of things affect Americans and the world. Two things right now, right? The current crises we are in, the global pandemic and the police brutality protests, and kind of almost like a second civil rights movement is emerging. And so much of it is happening in New York City. So much of it is being reported from New York City. Everyone looks to the governor and the mayor now to see how they're making decisions about a lot of these things and using it as almost a standard, good or bad, but that is something that's happening. So talk to us about, people are interested about learning more about the current state of affairs. To just get better informed, whether it's about global pandemics or about the civil rights movement or treatment of Black people in America or people of color. Generally speaking, what would you say the kind of sources they should be turning to?
Yeah, well, I mean, just briefly, I don't want to sort of come across as like chauvinistic about the New York City thing, but even though I'm the Gotham Center director, but I mean, this history matters exactly for the reason you stated before, about like good or bad. We sort of set the template. That was true with some of these issues dealing with civil rights. It's been true for a whole wide range of other issues. And so what happens in places like New York has this sort of knock-on effect, because it does historically have the effect of sort of setting a bar too low or too, I don't know about too high, but it sets the bar. To the question of how to sort of go about thinking about the moment and where to sort of look for resources, this is one of those moments where I really regret how isolated academic research is. I said to my grandfather, who reliably purchases every historical book on the New York Times bestseller list, that it's a vanishingly small number of books that end up in the Barnes and Nobles of the country when it comes to history. The vast majority of it is put out by academic presses for academic audiences, and hence the ivory tower metaphor. So there's a tremendous amount of research out there that, it's not always well written. It's, we're researchers and not writers necessarily. But there's the tremendous amount of good information out there that I wish, had a broader appeal. And sometimes it sort of gets through the cracks, and, there are certain journalists who are better than others, or certain publications that are better than others, and try to get those studies out there. But yeah, I mean, it's a vast subject.
Yeah, and so a lot of people find it overwhelming. Where would you suggest that they start?
So I have been recommending, to the question of police brutality, I have been recommending that people look at a book by Alex Vitale called The End of Policing. This is a short little primer put out by a CUNY professor who's a criminologist, who has been engaged with this issue for a very, very long time. The point of the book, really, it's a primer, so it sort of deals with a lot of different aspects of this issue. It's meant to sort of like summarize in a very publicly accessible way, which is why I'm recommending it, the different sort of features of this debate. But one of the things that I think is most useful about it is it's not just understanding the problem and what's driving the problem that could always use more light than heat. It's the solutions that get put forward, which, when you take that long view, and this comes across in Taylor's book as well, a lot of the things that are purported as solutions, whether, sincerely or not, by various actors, whether consciously or not, they're not new, and they're not necessarily data driven. In fact, that's the main sort of, value, I think, of Vitale's book is it says that a lot of these solutions actually just don't hold up on the metrics, and that there are ways to essentially sidestep what the people who are often involved in these protests are saying is the problem, which is not just the sort of the end result of the brutality, but also the context in which this thing constantly happens. This violence constantly happens.
Okay. And then for people who want even just more information, they feel like they just woke up to these inequities. And like you said, they have a sense of it, but not how deep it goes, not how long it's been around. And they're realizing they really didn't learn a lot, even if they went all the way to college. Most of other people's histories were just pretty much glossed over or ignored. What do you recommend? Are there history resources, or are there things on your website, certain history books, that they can just, even like you said, a primer? Because it is overwhelming, so they just might want some context. Anything that you would recommend?
I mean, it's a vast literature. It's necessarily vast because the history is so large. I mean, it's very strange to me that this resistance to understanding how large this history is to our country. I don't know if there's one primer per se. I mean, I'm sure that some of the folks listening will be familiar with books like The Half Has Never Been Told by Edward Baptiste, or Sven Beckert's History of Cotton. These are some of the more sort of popular public-facing works that sort of deal with the history of slavery and its role in the development of the economy. There are a tremendous number of books that deal with particular stories of people who are resisting. At all times in this history, there is resistance, and there is really heroic acts of bravery that are hard to fathom. I think that my advice would be to read some of the essays that are being published in some of the more serious magazines out there, and go to the source and look beyond the New York Times bestseller list. So if you see a journalist quoting some scholar who's interesting to you, go to their homepage and look at their CV and look at their syllabus and who they teach, right? Because they won't be teaching themselves, they'll be teaching the leading persons in that field. Go there. I mean, so much of our research is hidden behind paywalls, and that's unfortunate, but there are ways to get to it. Part of that, one of those movements, was scholars, historians, rewriting this history that we had, this conventional history in the 1950s that was very elite, focused on, literally just a few dead white guys who were the diplomats and the politicians and the leaders of companies. And we knew almost nothing about the history of the vast majority of people in the country. And so what's happened since then, the last 50, 60 years, is generations of historians, hundreds of scholars have gone out and written that history. And Zinn's was the first to sort of present in a single sort of accessible narrative form a lot of that new history, or some of that, and also some of the suppressed history. Because there's always been politics associated with history. It's always been a little bit of a dangerous profession as the public's concerned. There are a lot of people that don't want to hear about what happened, but it happened.
Right. And so just like lawyers, we like to go to the source material, just like historians. We have to work on making our work accessible, right? Because one of the things as lawyers, particularly those who litigate, go in front of juries, have to do is translate all the stuff that's happening into a bite-sized chunk that their audience can take in and make a decision about. And so that's why I said, let's find something accessible. So we agree on Zinn as a primer, it really is just, this is in contrast to everything I learned up to this point. Now that I know there's like a different side of this story, what else am I interested in? And then you can go from there. But my conversations with a lot of people, and from what I see on social media, is a complete just blindness to the very long history of oppression against certain groups, and exclusion, and destruction, because people are learning about Black Wall Street now and things like that. And so, and the role police have played historically to present day, and they feel like a lot of people are being attacked. The problem is, it just seems like it because it's the first time you're hearing all of it at the same time, or realizing that this was occurring. So where can people get more information about you, your book, the Gotham Center? Because you shared a lot of great information about New York City history. So for those people who are interested in that, but then also your book. Right. So I'm writing a book, finishing up a book finally, after too many years, about Daniel Patrick Moynihan that is about him, but also is really trying to use him as sort of synecdoche to get a larger history about liberalism in America between the New Deal and the present. I should be finishing that up soon. I've published a few things, as you said at the outset. They can get a taste of some of that research, and I hope to be publishing a lot more soon. The day job has been very taxing, but very rewarding. And you can find out all about that work at gothamcenter.org. If you're interested in New York City history, we have a digital publication that publishes twice a week. We have over 500 articles, mostly original research that they can search by category and theme to get a deep dive. We have podcasts and the like. As I said, we're getting into the business of non-credit bearing courses for the public, and all kinds of other programming that they can find out about at the website. So, and if you have any questions, you're all welcome to email me there. Oh, awesome. We get your email address too. So thank you so much. You might have just shot yourself in the foot with that one. I asked the trolls to be kind. That's all. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Peter Christian Aigner, for joining us on Journey to Esquire, the podcast. For more information on our programs and to see the show notes, go to www.journeytoesquire.com. This podcast will be on YouTube, Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all other places where you can access your most popular and loved podcasts like ours. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to another great episode of Journey to Esquire, the podcast. Support, share, subscribe. And for more, visit www.journeytoesquire.com.